Hi everyone and welcome to Isamu Rat Care. So today's 12 days of enrichment is going to look at something that's a little bit different. In fact, it literally is a little bit different. We're looking at novelty, and by novelty I mean things that are new or think they haven't seen for a good while. So we're thinking about how we can enrich our rats' lives by giving them new things to look at. So it's worth understanding when we're talking about this that rats are technically noiophobic. So the majority of wild rats, so that they're naturally noiophobic, which means they can have a fear of new things in a familiar place. And that's the important thing, it's the familiar place thing. They're actually quite interested in novel items, wild rats, when they're wandering around and it's in a completely new place. That's how they learn and find things. However, our pet rats, and this is where it's quite fundamentally different, when we breed animals to be domesticated, and when typically the majority of people who breed rats, they actually breed for them to be interested in new things. And that's for a number of reasons, but a lot of it's because that makes them better pets. You know, they kind of interact, enjoy new things and so on. But also actually there's health benefits as well, because a rat that is quite kind of familiar and relaxed around new things will generally be less stressed and deal with stressful situations better. There's some quite good science behind that side of things too. So it's one that's definitely something we should encourage in our rats. And actually it's not just about the genetic breeding. When we kind of like regularly expose our rats to new things, only minor changes, like lots of regular little new things, we help build up that resistance and help build up that kind of ability to enjoy new things for what they are and not just kind of be terrified of them. And one thing that I always try and do with my rats, both in and outside the cage, and particularly when they're young, is introduce new things, but not all at once. So I will have a kind of setup and I will use lots and lots of things, and then I might put in something they've never seen before. And same on free range, I will try and kind of like make them something. And like with everything that's so far in this series, it's not involving splashing out large amount of money. It's normally kind of me hunting around the house or the rat room and finding something, or sometimes I do go and find like a really cool new parrot toy. Quite often shows are deadly for these kind of things. I quite often come back with quite a lot of rat junk. I have a lot of rat junk, but making stuff is just as legitimate a kind of form of introducing new things. And actually sometimes you don't even have to make them. You just kind of see what you've got around. Let's say you've bought a potted plant, it's got a nice big plastic flower pot. You can quite easily reuse that as something novel to put in their cage as a new kind of nest, etc. So when you're actually looking back on all the other behaviours that we've looked at so far in terms of kind of like enhancing their lives, so digging, climbing, foraging, etc., applying that bit of kind of novelty to it, and that is actually something that's run through everything. I've tried to think of a different way to exploit that natural behaviour, and here I'm going to think about quite straightforward, a couple of straightforward ways that we can introduce novelty to both in the cage and outside the cage. So onto that, we'll do in the cage first, which we normally try and do unless I kind of put my videos in the wrong way around, which happens. You probably noticed I've not been great on this series. We're going to look at making a kind of parrot type toy, and I mean, I've got a bit of an example that I managed to find that I'd lost and discovered in one of my cupboards. So we're not necessarily going to make this, but this is just kind of an example of the kind of toys that you can buy for parrots, which normally involve lots of kind of interesting dangly bits on some sort of chain, so the parrots can kind of pull and move them around. This has been in with baby rats, not this book group actually, it's been a couple of groups ago. And you can tell because they've had a really good chew of various bits, destroyed things, generally really enjoyed themselves. And it's a really good example of where, I mean, some of this stuff is quite kind of especially coloured and everything, but you can do it very much from hunting around and seeing what you've got in the house. So I've just had a hunt, actually mostly in the house, though some stuff around the rat room as well. And bear in mind I accumulate a lot of junk, just generally. But these are the kind of things that I'm going to make my toy out of. So I found a load of pipe cleaners. They've got to be useful. I'm not sure how I'm going to use them yet, and I should say I have not pre-planned this. I've literally just walked around the house and found stuff and decided we're going to have a go. Right, so what else have I got? I found this thick tube. came off a tape reel of some description, and actually there's quite a lot of little tubes as well. These were kindly donated last time I saw the rat rations guys at a show, and they were had bags of tape dispensing rolls, and I thought they have to be kind of interesting or useful. I've got to find a use for them. I haven't so far, but we're going to find something today. I found a little bit of interesting kind of ribbon that looks like leaves. I don't really know what I'm going to do with that, but the rats are going to have fun destroying it, I'm sure. What I found last time I went to the kind of haberdashery kind of fabric shop, I don't really know why I went in there. I think I was looking for some ribbon or something, probably some of this ribbon, for kind of making snuffle mats with. But there was these kind of bags of leather offcuts, and I had no idea what I was going to do with them, but they were cheap, just like random different bits of leather, and I just thought that's got to be useful for something. Now leather is actually something that rats really find interesting and quite enjoy chewing, so I thought I might use some strips or squares or shapes of that in whatever toy I concoct shortly. Found a couple of wooden discs. These are typically, you can kind of like paint them, or I got a pyrography set which I'm going to play with for Christmas, but I thought they'll be nice on a toy, something for them to chew, because we know rats like chewing wood. Pine cone. I believe I probably foraged for this one, but you can also get them kind of like ready dried and everything. And another random bit of wood that I think fell off a different toy that I had, that I just thought would be quite interesting for them, and some string to kind of hold it together with the pipe cleaners. So what is also very useful in this, and the reason this is hanging around, is it's very useful to get yourself a drill. Now I use a hand drill, because I find they're a lot more kind of practical with some of the thin, brittle materials that you're dealing with rats, so they're very good for plastic and such. It's kind of like handy to have around, very controllable. Sadly the rats have also adapted it, so mine's a little bit chewed. I try not to leave it out too often, but they're assholes. So it's worth having one of those in. You can also use like kind of sharp pointed scissors to poke holes in things. It's a little bit more likely to stab yourself, and they're not as good as getting through the really thick stuff. I don't think I can get through that. We'll actually see whether I manage to get through it with this drill. But the first step, if you want to make any toys, is to make some holes in things. Now some of my bits already have holes drilled in them, which is always very handy. This doesn't really need a hole drilled in it because it's got lots of spiky bits, which would be great for hanging onto. But particularly this thing, I'm going to drill a hole in. Now this is where it's a hell of a lot easier with an assistant, or with something that sits flat. So let's give it a go. In fact, if you can actually jam it into something, it's quite useful too. I've got a vise in the garage, which is what I would normally use. Obviously it's a bit more difficult to do this on film. If this really becomes impossible, I will just have to nip into the garage and drill it in the vise. Vise is just something that holds it still. Technically what I could also do is tape this to the surface, and that would hold it well enough to just drilling a hole in. But actually it's kind of going okay in a very precarious position, wedged in my arm. I'm probably going to stab myself at some point. If I do and I start bleeding, I have to wait for this kind of video to be posted. I'm quite clumsy. Right, so we have one side. Nice and simple. Let's attempt to drill roughly opposite it on the other side, using my patented squishy under my arm. Yeah, this was not my best idea, but it's probably quite amusing for you guys to watch. I wonder if I could just drill it straight through there. Plan B. It's now self-clamping. Probably means I'll drill through into my work surface, but you do wonder at this stage how I got an engineering degree. Suffice to say, it just means I can draw diagrams, and doesn't mean that I'm safe to actually do any engineering related tasks. Ooh, we're nearly through, and I haven't actually broken anything yet. Woohoo! So this could be quite a good toy in its own right. Now I have to try and get it off the damn thing. Perfect. Right, so everything else, partly because I'm lazy and partly because I don't want to have to faff around with that drill again, I'm going to just kind of like hang through things. So first thing, let's stick a couple of these through here, and this can form my kind of like starting point. So that actually made quite a good base. Let's put a little thing. And what I'd encourage you to do with this is don't really overthink it, but try and think what might be enjoyable for the rats whilst trying to keep it kind of safe. You've got quite a lot of options. You don't have to make things kind of like the way you all, like even the way I'm doing it now. You definitely want to use different materials. You want to kind of make it so there's bits dangling off for interest's sake. And what I will say, if you're using pipe cleaners, try and keep the ends bent out of the way. They're not bad in terms of kind of wire options. I can make almost like a chain link out of this. That could be quite interesting. And I will say, like I said before, I have not pre-planned this. I'm literally just seeing what happens. And actually that's part of the fun of doing this kind of stuff for rats. You don't have to build something that looks beautiful. This is an ongoing theme, I think. I'm obviously paranoid that everything I make for the rats is ugly as hell. Right, so we've got a couple of chain links here. I wonder what I can do. Maybe I could join it on to here now. And part of the reason I'm using this kind of pipe cleaner rather than the string is it'll last a little bit longer. They can still, in theory, chew through it, but maybe not quite as fast. This is the pine cone is actually quite good for this because it's kind of, its little bits just kind of like lend itself having stuff through. Right, we're going to put another one of these on. That's a bit harder because it's a bit short. Right, so it's a bit linear at the moment and I haven't used my fun leather stuff. So I'm going to, I wonder if I could plait this. That might be quite interesting for them. Really all I'm kind of doing is thinking of ways to use the material that might be interesting for the rats. And that's kind of like half the fun in itself. I should say this is enrichment both for humans and rats, making them things. And it's something that I do really enjoy doing, and I try and like make them something new every clean out. This isn't something that you're going to do all the time because if you're making something every single day that was this kind of level of effort, it would take quite a lot of time, and actually the rats might get a bit bored by the same materials. You're going to run out of ideas. So I would try and do something kind of like interesting with them every day, but it doesn't mean that you give them new items. I'll try and like change up free range like a couple times a week for the babies, maybe once a week for my adults, and then for kind of like the cage definitely gets changed up quite a lot every time I free range. I could try and tie that in a knot, but it's feeling a bit stiff. But this is just to make it easier for me to plait it because it's easier when it's hanging onto something. I could plait it tighter, but I think looser will give them more chance to kind of like, I can hang stuff in it and they can climb up it a bit more easily. Right, that's good. Now let's see, how can we incorporate it in the tie? Oh, I could poke it through here and then actually just secure it with a bit more wire. Or actually, why don't I use my interesting bit of ribbon? Problem with this interesting bit of ribbon is it kind of likes to tie itself in knots. It was an absolute pain in the neck when I was using it on my stringy bit. When I was using it on snuffle mats. I should do a tutorial on how to make more complicated snuffle mats than like very simple paper one. Right, so we've got a bit of kind of like ribbon. It's almost like a little person. We've got arms. We've not got any legs. I could actually make them some legs from another kind of bit of leather. I wonder if I could do something with this. It's quite thick, this leather. It might need my, yes, it needs my proper scissors. Alright, let's do this quickly, because you're probably bored to death of seeing me making a tie by now. Now, this is much thicker, so I'm not going to plait this one. I'm just going to get some little strands. Then poke it through. Possibly easier said than done. That looks good. And then I can attach one of these to each of the legs. Let's puncture a little bit of hole in. For working with the leather, I tend to just use scissors, but leather is actually really blooming tough. I forgot about how tough it is. Small impromptu drilling moment. Now I've got clever, I've got like a base for my drilling. Let's just pretend that that didn't happen and go back to the scissors option. That's better. Right, that will let me get what I want through. The reason I put the wood under here is I don't want to kind of puncture through going through to the work surface. So that works great. And I can now, in theory, put this through and attach on some little feet. When I say feet, of course, I mean random dangly bits. I don't actually need all of that. All the spiky bits out of the way. And through this bit. And where's that other bit ring? Now I haven't used everything that I've got on there, but I've actually used most things, which is surprising. I didn't think I'd use that much. And we have a hanging man type thing with lots of dangly stuff on for them. Clearly a green man, hence why he's got his like little bit of ribbon. All I will do is I'll put this at the top and then I can hang it up very easily with just kind of a shower ring. So we'll see what they make of that in the cage. It's definitely a little bit new. I wonder what the babies might make of it. Could try them on it. Though the cage is a bit short and this is quite long. I might put it in the adults cage, so we'll just have a nip over and see what they think of things. So we're on to the trial by fire for my poor little hanging green man. Right, let's pop you two in so you don't fall off or escape. There you go. What do you think of this? Now straight away, this is one of the things I love about rats. I'll open this a bit so you can properly see them. They're just interested. It's new, it's novel, it's something that they've not seen before. Leather is not something that actually the majority of these rats have dealt with before, but I do know rats in the past have really found it interesting. In fact, chocker beans find it quite interesting. You want to see whether it's edible. What I can do, and I probably will at some point, is add little treats and toys to this. It'll be interesting to see how long it stands up, given that it's homemade, but actually if they destroy it very, very quickly, it's fine, because I put it together, I can make another one, I can fix it, I can probably reuse a lot of the parts if they do take it apart. It's just something a bit different for them. Like I say, novelty, and something that they can experience different textures, different tastes, different smells, and kind of see what they want to do with it. Snufkin clearly wants to eat the leather. I think the leather was quite a good call, actually. Right, so let's go on to novelty in free range. Sorry, babes. Heads, toes. Good girl. Yeah, so let's go over to free range and see how we can kind of spice that up a little bit for the babies. Right, so onto free range time. Now this is the fairly standard free range area that the babies have had for quite a while. Now you've seen, as we've gone through this week, I've quite often added bits and pieces to this, added a bit of interest for them, new things and so on. And I'm just going to kind of continue this trend, but instead of kind of making something or taking a lot of time over something, I'm going to show you the kind of items that, just looking around the rat room, I thought maybe I can add these to add a bit of enrichment. And it's something that I always try and make a point of doing, particularly on babies this kind of age. It's very formative for them. And actually, like these are now kind of like just over 6 weeks. They're going to be going to their new homes next week or the week after. And in fact, maybe a little later than that, some of them, because they're going via a show. But yes, it's very much a kind of, this is the stage where they're really learning to be brave. So I want to add as much as I can. It's the same when you get new babies home from a breeder. It's a really important time to try and introduce things and not worry too much if they get a little bit startled at first. Right, so first kind of thing that you can add. So if you remember this parrot toy that I found earlier, well, I'm going to stick this onto free range, something they've not seen before. And so whilst it does smell of rats, it is something that's new to them, and it's one of the simplest ways that you can add novelty is to just add some sort of toy or object that they've not seen before or not seen for a long time. Right, next thing that I might want to add. So we did a bit of crafting earlier. I've got all my random craft supplies in this box. Let's see what they make of it. There's some interesting smells. Like I was talking about leather before, that's always interesting to different rats. So straight away it's like, ooh, new things. A bit of fun. Somebody got me this Halloween rat one year. So actually it's quite, if I can support it a little bit so they don't kind of topple it over, it's quite a good climbing frame. So we can see what they make of that. If I can put pour up there, I might just get a bit of wire and tie it on because I don't want it to fall down on them. But it's like, it's using things that you perhaps wouldn't normally think of and just introducing them to the rats. It's not kind of splashing out lots of money, it's not being super clever, it's just, they might like that, and if they don't, you know what, just replace it with something else next time. You really like leather, don't you, miss? Yes, I saw you. What else? We fitted a new hose recently, so we've got a bit of old hose now. It's not something I would leave out for a long time because I don't want them kind of like ingesting a lot of it, but it's a smell that they haven't got before, both the kind of like outdoor smell on the hose, there's a bit of metal there, there's different materials. I'll probably only leave it out for one. I could actually stretch it out and use it as a rope for them, which would be quite interesting. But it's like all these interesting things. They're really, really liking that leather. I should definitely get more of those leather offcuts for them. It'd be quite nice to actually fill like a little show tank full of scraps and different materials. It'd be quite a fun thing for them to do. Have we got anything else? Yes? No? This is something I quite often free range with babies, but I've entirely forgotten I got it until recently. It's a little bit different because it's a seesaw, and it's probably going to be a bit odd for them because it moves in different ways than they used to. So I'll see what they think of it. It makes noises too. Still, I think my box of random crafting scraps is winning. What else? A little plastic toy. Again, I think this is some sort of hamster toy that somebody was giving away. I snaffled it for babies. Again, it's something that I found. I have this like box of stuff for baby free range, which I entirely forgot about this time around, which is great when it comes to novelty because it means there's loads of stuff that I know is really good for babies that they've never seen before. But to be fair, it normally goes the opposite way, so I'll have like set amount of stuff that I bring out for baby free range, and then I'll start hunting around the rest of the rat room and bringing other stuff out for them. But like with this and this, it doesn't actually have to be rat stuff. When I say rat stuff, most of my rat stuff isn't actually rat stuff, it's quite often parrot or other animal stuff. But yes, it can be other different textures and smells. At one point I had a hammer out on here for a while. It smelled something entirely different. It was from the garage, so a completely different room, and they found it quite fascinating and did enjoy it. I will be honest though, given the kind of age they're at, one of their kind of favourite things to play with is the climbing frame of Gemma. But yes, that's my watch. You've seen that before, I don't know why that's interesting. Which is very nice to do, but it's still nice to give them kind of different objects to play with. And even like my adults will still enjoy just random bits of objects that are found around the house or toys they haven't seen for months and months. Just bringing them out, either putting them in the cage or on free range, or displaying them in a new way where they can use them in different ways, like my kind of climbing frame of skeleton rats. Where are you going? Apparently tissues are also quite an exciting novelty, says the rats in the pouch who got themselves in. But yes, so that's one thing to think about. It's like, use your creativity. Don't let yourself be limited, other than by making sure that it's something that's safe for the rats to be around. You don't want to give them something that's going to cause them problems. A bit like that hose I wouldn't put in the cage, because I'm not sure how edible the material is, but out on free range when they're heavily supervised, it's fine for a bit of an experience. At most they'll just give it a slight nibble and not kind of like end up having a taste for it and eating most of it. So give it a go, see what they kind of enjoy, and don't get hung up or worry too much about it, and just kind of change it up. Try and do something novel or interesting for them at least once a week. More than that if you can incorporate it both free range and in the cage. So I'm going to say goodbye from me and Asami Rats, and we'll see you for the final day of 12 Days of Christmas tomorrow.